2 days after your kid dies, you go to work. Because men need martinis. Because they need them dry with a twist of lemon. Because they drink them extra dry, you slash lemons into thin strips that you rub on the rim of the glass at a ghost of vermouth. Because your kid is a ghost, halfway to heaven or wherever, in a gold spaceship of a casket, you are talked into buying by a guy snowing dandruff under the shoulders of his shiny suit. Because men need martinis and your regulars tip big. Because you need money to buy the casket you're paying for in installments, you cut oranges without complaining. Because lady drinks need plastic swords of oranges and cherries, the color of fresh blood, and men need their martinis dry with a mist of vermouth, a twist of lemon. Because the knife is sharp, a silver glitter in the dark of the bar you slash and slash. Because your kid is mist, because he's a handful of silver glitter in the dark, because you need and need.
This is Brockport Writers Forum.
Good morning. We're very pleased to have with us today Derek Walcott.
Our guest today is John Barth.
Our guest today, Rita Dove.
Welcome Grace Paley to Brockport.
The writing of Isaac Bashevis Singer. The poetry of Robert Hayden.
Our very special guest today, Lucille Clifton.
Nadine Gordimer. The poetry of Anne Sexton. Today, the poetry of Seamus Heaney.
I wonder if you'd like to read a section from the novel.
Hey, welcome to the Brockport Writers Forum. I'm Jim Horton, and I'm here with Sarah Freligh, author of 7, I think, books of prose and poetry, and a teacher and a Rochesterian, and Carly Fowler, who's a student in the creative writing program here at Brockport and a writer. Thanks for coming back, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back after, 9 years. About 9 years till
it's like
to the
5
day.
days short of 9 years.
Wow.
A different time.
We should have a cake and celebrate your, like I was actually the first interview that you did when you took over the Writers Forum.
That's true.
You were great then.
Well, that's not what we're here to talk about. But thanks for coming back, and thanks for reading. I wanted, for reading the thing you just read from the book Hereafter, it occurred to me as you're reading that if a person were watching this show without having read the book, which will happen at some point, they might think you just read a poem. And you just said something before the camera started that was a complete surprise to me, that this is a poem.
Well, it's a poem in prose. I teach online, and I teach micro classes online, microfiction. And one of my favorite exercises to do with my students is to have them choose a poetic form of established verse form, a sonnet, a pantom, a sestina, one with rules and kind of like a recipe for doing it. And a pantom is, like a lot of, it's sort of been, it's sort of a parlor trick now for prose writers to adapt poetic forms into prose. Brenda Miller, who's a fabulous nonfictionist, was one of the first ones to do it, and she did a particularly long piece called Summer of 78, I think. And I give that to my students to read and have them do it, and they hate it. They feel, how dare you try to, shove my prose into a very small box. So I said, okay, I had to do it myself to sort of say, hey, I've done it, here it is. So I chose this form the pantom to write this particular piece in, because the pantom works on repetition. Basically, if it's the poetic verse form is the second and fourth line, repeat in the following stanza as the first and third line. The first line of the poem becomes the last line of the poem itself, and so you can, basically what you do is just, keep copying lines into, stanzas and then write around it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I did, but, the key word here is adapt, is that I didn't do it, you never do it the way a poet might. And even poets, like Fudge, they, they alter the lines. They'll just keep an image. They might keep a phrase rather than the whole line. Yeah. But the pantom is great for, because it's a repeating form, it's great for a character who keeps coming back to something, that something is on their minds that they can't get out of. And here's this woman who has to go to work 2 days after her kid died because she has no money. And, so she keeps, even as she's making drinks, she has to make these drinks. She keeps coming back to the reason why, as, like anybody would. So, yeah, it was a great, it's poetic form when you're going to adapt it for a poem or for a piece of prose. I think, students would find that it didn't feel like a very narrow, it didn't feel like they were confined to a box once they realized that the form could unleash a lot of potential for the piece itself. And this is what the pantom does for that, is like really expands on that sense of, coming back to something, being obsessed by something and not being able to get away from it. So that's kind of why I did it. Yeah. And I've done it a few other times, but like this one I kind of liked. The other ones have stayed in the computer where they belong. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, reading this, well, just the title, it went by quickly, but the title is 2 days after your kid dies, you go to work. So there's the clear question is, why would you do that?
Sure.
She shouldn't be there.
Right.
So that's, yeah. Another thing this one does is, well, let me back up a minute. It's a novella in Flash.
Yeah, it's actually a novella in micro. I mean, Flash is kind of, considered to be, there's different, you could talk to 100 different people, they'd have 100 different definitions, but, let's say a Flash piece is, let's go with Smoke Long Quarterly, one of the kind of esteemed journals of Flash, 700 words, where micro is 400 words or fewer. So I think most of these come on in at that, and it was kind of, I was trying it's really hybrid of prose and poetry.
Yeah.
Of the compression I learned when I was a poet and the ability to distill things into metaphors, the use of titles. You pointed out that, you set up the exposition in the title and let the story do its work. You don't have to spend a lot of time explaining to the reader because you've situated them in the very beginning as to, here's the situation you're going to enter, and then they accept that. So. Yeah. They're very important in poetry, and you figure out that they're very important in everything, but especially so in shorter pieces where you don't have the elbow room to do a lot of explaining, that, let their title handle a lot of that exposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of these occasionally they'll go onto a second page, but never 2 full pages. Long. Those are the long ones, and many are less than half a page.
Yeah.
But also with the one you just read, 2 days, it hits a lot of notes or motifs, you might call them. There are things that, because your kid is a ghost. And it didn't really hit me until, I think it was working on me, the ghosts that keep coming up. But only on my second time through the book, I started, oh wait, this word is coming back in a different way.
Yeah.
Knives, slicing, swords, and is that something you thought about much structurally as you were putting?
I think at some point, yeah. I mean, when I was writing the pieces themselves, they were just exercises I was doing in a notebook, this notebook that I'll talk about in a minute. But I was just trying to I was doing August micro a day in August of 2022, when I was just trying to write 300 words a day, not 300 words of an ongoing, larger short story or a novel, but 300 words that stood alone. In the first 5 days, I was just kind of flailing around, just writing, not with any purpose. I was just doing 300 words a day that were standalones, but they kind of weren't going anywhere. So. On the 5th day, I had to drive from New York to Michigan to do a reading, and I was too early to check in my Airbnb, so I went to McDonald's and had something cool, and I decided I'd do my 300 words there. And there are these teenage boys sitting at the next table slurping on their Slurpee drinks, those icy ones, and a woman cleaning the table beyond them. And they never interacted, but in the piece I wrote, they did interact. She was working there, and they came and approached her, and that became McDonald's, which is probably 3/4 of the way into the book. And she had I realized that that she was a woman who working there in a service position whose son had died, and these boys reminded of her son. So I had to, from there on, I had a character to kind of hang the rest of the stories on and a situation. So I kind of wrote around that to see, well, how did her son die? What happened? How does she? And it became clear at some point that what I was sort of writing was a journey through grief. That for the first, shock of hearing the news that, your son is terminally ill. He was 15 when he died, and going through that, and then most of the afterwards, which is, the hereafter of how do you go on after something like that's happened. So I kind of put them away, just shove them away, and then I would take one out every now and then, type it up and send it out. And at some point I realized, this is kind of, it needs to be all under one roof, I have to assemble these under a building so that the motifs, the continuing threads that kind of connect the thing, it's sort of chronological, but not really. It goes forward, it moves back. Thanks to, most of them are in a third person limited omniscient, which allows you to do that. It gives you great flexibility inside of the character's head to travel back and forth in time. And, I think at some point, I was aware of the connections of images, of motifs, of, and able to put the stories together that way. But writing them, you're just trying to get down 300 words, that's all.
Okay. I wondered, that's something you were talking about earlier, Carly, this moving around in time.
Yeah, so the moving around in time, because when I read it in one sitting, and I read it in a little less than an hour, but as I was going through...
Very quick book,
It is, yes. As I was going through, I couldn't necessarily place when and where we were.
Right.
You could tell a little bit, she's sealing, and especially when you look at the beginning and the end, there's a very stark contrast. But what's the time frame, or is there a time frame?
Not really. I was very, I was probably, if it's a loose time frame of from the time her son dies, if you're going to take the main, if you're going to take the main plot line of the novella, from the time her son dies to afterwards, when we get to the last piece hereafter, probably a period of 2 years, maybe, enough time to kind of move through, and, 3 years. But then it goes back, she goes back to, when she was young and cool and working in Florida, and when she first had him. And so there really isn't, and I think that's one of the things that you could do with novella in flash or a novella in micro like this is that you can play a little more with chronology. It's not like a novel where, although I've read many novels that Infinite Jest comes to mind where, where am I, what am I doing here? But I probably should have read the notes, all the notes, and I didn't. All the notes.
That's a big, thick book. It's very different from...
I've tried to read it 4 times, and 5th time I finally managed it.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more and more, it's crazy how when it came out it was just this wild thing that could never happen, and now it's like, whoa. It's become much more of a realist novel than it was before. Yeah.
When sorry to interrupt.
Yep, go ahead. I was done.
When I first picked the book up, I thought a novel and these little shots, that's strange. That's not realism. And one of my students, and then I quickly became oriented. And a student said to me last week, it is not possible to remember your life in the order that it happened. And
Bingo.
I thought, you're right. And so maybe this is maybe it's the novel that starts out once upon a time and tells the life story in chronological order. Maybe that's the thing that's artificial.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is Because
Well,
we're so
yeah.
much of this, we're really locked in her head with her grief and her
That's it. Right.
guilt. And
Yeah, her inability to care for her son the way she should, or the way she could if she was a person of means. But yeah, that's a very wise student, and I would like you to point them out.
you'll meet him.
Oh, good, because
Yeah.
that's that is probably about as close as I'm going to steal that from now on. But yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why I think that for the most part the limited omniscient third person was the best choice for most of the pieces. Told from her point of view, where she was free to go to places that were more pleasant to her than where she was now, sitting by her son's bed or at work after he died, or
Right.
at a therapist's office, or in a circle of group therapy that she didn't want to be in, or wherever. So and it is impossible to, I think it's. Somebody said to me, they said this reads like a memoir in micro prose.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's interesting. I mean, it's totally fiction. I mean, I've certainly had friends whose children have died. And I've had, experienced, most of us get to a certain age and we experienced a lot of loss ourselves and understand that journey through grief. But I think that, it was her, that's kind of how memoir works too, that you're not assembling your life according to a nice chronology that's very tidy and ordered, but something more, that's more associative, or being able to travel to some place where you'd rather be in your head rather than where you are. So, yeah.
Well, I think it goes both ways. That look at the one called There, where it ends with the idea,
20.
Page 20.
Thank you. There.
She's free. She could drive to Florida tonight. Why doesn't she? Because of the kid who's sitting next to her.
The ghost.
But actually, she's having this experience, imagining him saying, "Are we there yet?" when he's actually gone.
Yep.
So, I guess that's an instance where the bad thing is with her, keeping her from letting go, and the bad memory is there.
Or it's, it's keeping her going.
Well,
Keeping her anchored to this earth.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, now you're go ahead, Carla.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, this is a different tangent.
Okay.
But speaking of the earth, and you spoke of motifs, there's several different instances of a gold spaceship, or a meteor, or the debris of space. What made you want to write with that, or include that? Because that caught my eye.
That's really interesting, because I'm not, I'm not a big Star Wars fan or Star Trek, although I have a good friend who is a Trekkie. I think probably because of the time when I grew up. I came of age with the space program.
Right.
And, they used to wheel the TV into the room, and we would watch John Glenn take off, and woo, he went around the earth 3 times. Wow, that's big. Everything was successful until it wasn't. And I wrote about the one that wasn't, where they had the fire on the launch pad, the test where they had to fish the astronauts out and dead. And I think that's, just what I grew up with. And I think that, Patty Lee did, or, she has some connection to that. I don't know. I think I just imposed it on it. But it's also, too, it suggests, too, a place of escape, of being away from the world. And so much of this is wanting to, I think so much of grief is wanting not to be where you are. And you can't, I'm not talking about, being in Brockport or Rochester, a physical place, but not wanting to be in this place where you are, the person is gone and you will never talk to them again. you'll never be in their presence again, and wanting to be someplace else. And maybe, you know, like, hey, I mean, meteors and spaceships, and there's, you know, there's not too far from heaven, wherever that is, or whatever that is. I don't even know if there is one. She doesn't either. But yeah, I think part of it too is that when I was putting this together as a book, I decided that I needed a project because in August of 2023, my dad, who was 102 at the time, so he had a great long life, he died. He fell and was in the hospital for 5 days, and we moved him to hospice care, and he died. And it was a really, you know, if you can call any death good, it was a really good death. This is how we should all die, with dignity, in Strong Hospital of all places. But so I realized that, you know, like, in order to kind of cope with my grief and to, you know, like, to try not to go around and around, that I needed a project to kind of focus on. So I started making these into a book. You know, like, I printed everything out that I had and put it on my bed, which is the largest surface in my house, and started moving things around and seeing how they fit. And once I had a sort of an order, I revised the stories so that they would, you know, like, they wouldn't necessarily be standalone anymore, but they would, you know, coexist with the one next to it or before it, or the one that was going to be 5, you know, like, stories down. And I think when I revised, I'd written them about a woman who was going, you know, the journey through grief. But at that time, I was the person who was going the journey through grief, embarking on that. So her grief became mine, you know, mine became hers. And I revised them with a book towards that. That's never far away. So if there's any memoir in it, even though it's happening to another person, a character that I invented, it happened to me. I lost my dad, she lost her son.
And you start the book, I think it's this very first section on page 1, talking about an absent father. But it's different here. We're with Patty Lee, thinking about her son Petey growing up without a father. That's really interesting, Sarah, because it's a memoir and it's not a memoir, and it seems like some of these things you turn them around backwards in order to talk about them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you write your fiction, are they completely absent of anything in your life?
No.
There you go.
No, they're not. And
it could be a cup that you held, as simple as that. You know, like, oh, I held this cup and I remember the memory of that, so that's what I'm gonna give that cup a home. It's interesting because I remember Margaret Atwood talking about Cat's Eye. I don't know if she talked about this when she was here, which came out in like the late 80s. Yeah. And she talked about Cat's Eye as being the book where she had all these artifacts from her childhood, all the things she remembered, you know, when she was going up to the, you know, like, her father was a bug scientist, and they used to go up to the wilds of, you know, like, northern Canada and live in tents, and then, you know, she didn't have a permanent home until he started teaching, I think, at University of Toronto. But, you know, she remembers that what the gas pumps looked like, and the sound of the chime that, you know, like Dominion time. And so she wrote this book as a receptacle for all the artifacts of her childhood and beyond. And I thought, wow, you know, like, maybe that's, you know, like, yes, we're writing fiction, but we're also, you know, like, using these as receptacles for, you know, like, our lives, for things in our lives, for characters that we've made out of, you know, I don't know anybody who writes total fiction except for Nabokov, you know. I mean, he makes everything up, but, you know, like, you know, most of us aren't that good, so we just, you know, we draw on life. I mean, and when you first start writing, I think you write a lot on, you know, thinly veiled autobiography. Yeah. Although autofiction is big again, I guess, but.
I want to hear more about that. We're going to take a break for a couple minutes, and we'll be right back after we hear from some students.
Are you interested in learning about the public relations field? My name is Keith Doherty, a junior at SUNY Brockport, and I would like to introduce you to the Public Relations Club. The PR Club offers an opportunity to be a part of an award-winning team and create campaigns for organizations, as well as offering networking opportunities for potential internships. Want to learn more? You can visit our club page at mybrockport.edu.
Have you ever been scared to walk around on campus? Hi, I'm Amanda, a student at SUNY Brockport. I have a solution for you. The University Police Department is committed to your safety. We have a student-run patrol program that provides secure rides to those in need. We pride ourselves on crime prevention and providing a safe environment for students, faculty, and visitors. We also have other resources such as blue light phones and monitored safe exchange zones. Contact us at our non-emergent phone number or our campus escort line, keeping you in mind to prevent crime.
Are you a student or faculty member at SUNY Brockport and struggle with food insecurity? Prior to the pandemic, students took a survey and it was discovered that 45% of Brockport students could not afford food, leading them to being unable to focus on their studies. The pantry located in Daly Hall on campus offers various options from canned and frozen food to refrigerated items. The pantry works hard to prevent hunger across all individuals on campus. Stop by the pantry to grab your essentials to ensure that you are thriving here at SUNY Brockport. The pantry's got your back.
A lot of people like to go to the cafe, but what is the real reason students go to the cafe? To get caffeinated. Come to the Rajmadan Cafe. We have everything to help you wake up and to be motivated to complete those assignments. We have gourmet coffees and a varied tea selection. So no matter what you're looking for, we have you covered. Grab lunch or dessert to help you during your study session. Come visit us at Rajmadan Cafe in the Drake Memorial Library. I'm Harley Thomas and Amanda Wells produced this message. Please caffeinate responsibly.
Hey, we're back with Sarah Freligh and Carly Fowler. Sarah, let's hear firsts.
Firsts, okay.
Page 45.
Okay, all right. Firsts. More and more there are firsts. The first time she puts her head underwater. The first time she swims a length of the pool without stopping. The first 500 yards, the first mile, this and this. And here she thought she was done with all that. Here she thought that when something or someone ends, everything does. The days and days of gray after Petey died, how she drove his clothes and the clock radio from the hospital to the Goodwill bin in the Tops parking lot, tossed everything in. The clothes fluttering and sinking, the clock radio shattering, a cheap thing picked up at a Kmart on sale. No one wanted them anymore, the salesman said. They want digital and Wi-Fi and big sound. But Petey liked to sit and watch the swoop of the red secondhand, swore that it stopped right before it hit 12 and then jumped 3 seconds to catch up to itself. Goodbye, radio. Goodbye, Petey. She wonders what he'd say if he saw her soft self packed into spandex, capped and goggled, in the swimming pool at the Y. In the water, they're all weightless. It's a good place to cry, too. Just dip your face in and have at it, though lately she hasn't had to. Yesterday, she heard someone whistling in the shower, and it turned out to be her. Another first. Imagine that.
Yeah, that's a surprising moment in this book. It's coming very close to the end, almost at the end.
Probably the denouement.
Yeah.
Or the resolution.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about fiction and autofiction and memoir mixed with fiction, and I think I know that you're a swimmer. In fact, you mentioned it earlier.
I am.
Yeah.
I am. In fact, I think one of the poems in Sad Math, which we talked about in 2016, one of the poems in Sad Math is about the speaker, it's an I, and everybody, when you write poems, they go, oh, this happened to you, and it's like, no, it's, poets are thieves too, they steal from other people and make up characters, so it's not, but that was pretty close to my experience, where I remember having to put a really beloved cat down who had gotten very ill and having to take to the vet and go do the deed for the good of the animal, and then going to the Y right afterwards and going swimming and putting my face in the water and crying and realizing that this is a really safe place to cry, that like nobody's going to see you. So yeah. Yeah, so that one, I use it in a poem, and I brought it back again when, like I realized, like what could she do that was so far from her experience, like as a white person, as a person of, of very few means, of, like no husband, the father is not around and has not been for years, and her son is gone, and for her to, like take a swimming lesson and learn how to swim and be able to swim 500 yards and then a mile it's a huge, huge move towards something positive and something, like the push towards that journey. And water is just such a balm. There's so much water in religious ceremonies. Although I'm not particularly religious, I am, I was raised an Episcopalian, and we do all the baptism and washing of the feet and in the Bible, and it's, and it's healing, just being immersed in water. And to me, it was a great place for her to end up. And it helped that I was also a swimmer, because I could, write to some of that. But yeah, so that's why I did it. But she is not me. In no way is she like me. But just what I said, we take things from our lives and give them to our characters.
I want to ask you about an idea that I've heard particularly in the last few years. It's not new, but I always wonder about it. There's an idea that stories belong to some people and not to other people. So like there might be, I don't even want to give an example, but not your story to tell, or this is your story to tell. Appropriation of somebody else's story. And it could happen in all kinds of ways, I imagine. But do you ever think about that, and what's your take on it? Because you just described being in McDonald's and kind of there's something going on elsewhere, and the woman that was cleaning there, you didn't actually talk to her, right? So this story of a mother who lost her child came from somewhere. Right. What's your take on that?
Well, if we were not able to, as writers, to write outside of our experience, that there would be no such thing as fiction. Then we're all writing nonfiction. And I think that some of the finest books, some of the most intriguing, complex characters that I've read have been written by writers who are not. Larry McMurtry, for example, wrote wonderful female characters, especially in his early books. Emma, Patsy from Moving On, Emma from Terms of Endearment, and All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, his famous trilogy that he started out with and pretty much made his name. Toni Morrison wrote fabulous, wrote a really, really complex, interesting white character in several of her books. Danielle Evans in her collection, I'm just thinking of, like things off the top of my head. In her last collection, the Office of Historical Corrections, there is one narrated by Danielle is a black woman who wrote from the point of view of a white character, and it's a very, very effective story. I think that if you are just appropriating, that is just taking this just for effect, yes. But if you are immersing themselves in the experience, you're understanding the experience of death, whether it's a father or a brother or a son, we all go through a similar kind of trajectory of moving through grief, of denial and acceptance and eventually, anger, bargaining. So that, like I understand that, and I think I was able to adapt it for Patty Lee. And some people will say, well, that's not you. But then again, I'm saying, well, then, then there can be no such thing as fiction. And that bothers me. that bothers me because, you know, like I love fiction. I love immersing myself in the lives of others. And to, you know, like have to stay in our lane, nonfiction doesn't interest me.
And yet you started out as a journalist, as a reporter.
I did.
Which is another way of immersing yourself in other people's,
Yeah.
like literally going up to a stranger and saying, tell me about what just happened.
Yeah, I remember, you know, like I was a sports writer, so I was, you know, like doing most of my interviews in a, you know, like a sweaty, smelly locker room. But I was in Philadelphia. I worked for the Inquirer when the move happened. Move was when when there was a group of people who had taken over a house in a neighborhood, a middle class.
Move.
Yeah, Move, a middle class
MOV.
black neighborhood, and the neighbors had gone to. They played music very loud all night, and they were, you know, like pretty disruptive. And it was the neighbors, you know, like went to through the proper channels to say, you know, could we have this address? And, you know, the city completely, you know, like overreacted and dropped a bomb on the house and basically set the entire neighborhood on fire. And these people had lived there for years and years and years. And they basically, you know, like anybody who was in the newsroom that day, we got sent out on the street to talk to people. And I remember talking to a woman who had lost her house and asking her what she would miss. And she says, she says, I've often thought about this, even before. She said, I always thought I would miss, you know, like my big refrigerator or, you know, a dress that I own. She said, but what I really miss is, you know, like what I realize that I'm going to miss and I can never get back is the drawings that my grandchildren did that were on the refrigerator. And she can buy a new refrigerator and get another dress and, you know, like another house and assemble the furniture, but you know, she will never get that back, and they will never get that neighborhood back, that sense of, you know, like neighborliness. And that's what really came through. So yeah, that was probably my most memorable time of feeling like I was intruding in somebody's life and having to ask them. But what you realize too is that it's amazing that people want to talk. They want to talk. They want to talk about things with somebody. It doesn't matter if they're a stranger or not. They want to say, this is how I'm feeling. And that made me realize how, you know, like, why, you know, like I loved reading fiction so much, because it was entering the lives of others and feeling like they were talking to me. They were telling me things that the author, through the conduit of the author, they're telling me things. So, you know, even at that time, I was sort of getting tired of writing other people's words. I wanted to write my own. So, you know, basically when I took a buyout at the newspaper, they were doing some reorganization. And I basically walked up to Temple University, you know, about 20 blocks north, and I begged my way into the MA program. And I started writing stories.
But, you know, I don't think it's something that we have creative writing workshops and you teach creative writing, and that's not something I talk to students much about being able to go up to a stranger and say, what's your, to begin a conversation with a stranger. And were you trained to that, or is it just something you're good at?
No, it was a thing that I was most uncomfortable about in the job. Yeah. It made me the most uncomfortable about, you know, like picking up the phone and having to call somebody, especially having to call somebody about something bad that they had done. Yeah. Hey, is it true you stole $1 million from, you know, great. Who is this? It was never fun. But, you know, like, I think, too, talking to strangers or picking up the phone and doing interviews, it would behoove the fiction writer to do that, because that's how we move past appropriation. That's how we get to understand people's lives, is talking to them. So I think that maybe it's something you want to build into your, you know, like, that they have to write a story based on some research that they do. And part of the research is, you know, like talking to somebody who is this character, a funeral director, for example. So yeah, so there's Andrea Barrett just has a new book out. It's a very small book called Dust and Light about writing historical fiction and the research she does and how how the person who's writing historical fiction is walking this very fine line, because you can write just write research and it's going to be very dry, and at some place you have to, like, let that research allow you to jump into the world of the imagination and then get away from that, but stay true to the period and what people will be wearing and saying, how they would get around. So yeah, so that's kind of an appropriation in itself. She didn't live at that time. How dare she write about those people? Right. So, but research, I think, is the key to understanding the other and being able to write about that as a complex character and not a caricature, somebody just standing in as a representative of whatever you want to prove or show.
Yeah. What about that yellow notebook there?
Oh, my yellow notebook. Yeah, well, I have this thing about notebooks, and if I write in notebooks a lot, I write on my computer a lot, I do a little of both, but yeah. Whenever I want to really get my yayas out and not feel like hemmed in by, sometimes you feel like it's really wild, because on a computer you can change anything, but, like, it's not always the best thing to do, so you might want to just let it out. But, like, whenever I'm feeling stuck, or, like, I'll get in my notebook and just make a mess. So a lot of this is a mess. You could see, too, that a lot of it I'll write, like, I hate so-and-so, it's really hot outside, blah, blah, blah. So, like, you can't see this. You can't. So this is the notebook I used when I started doing the August Micro a Day Challenge, when I was writing 300 words a day, that eventually became this. And you can see that, like, I put the date at the top and when I revised it. Yeah. And it's very fun. It's and I also have this thing about notebooks that they can't cost more than $1.10. Now, this was 99 cents.
Can I touch it?
Yeah.
Why?
It's radioactive.
Why not? I'm going to hold it up so that people can see it a little bit.
And you could try to read my writing, but you can't.
Read, but
it's like hieroglyphs.
You kind of see the. I don't see a lot of crossouts there.
There isn't.
It's really.
I don't. I just
sort of read it.
Oh, it's hieroglyphs. It's hieroglyphs. You want to see it?
Yeah, I do.
Why $1.10?
It's like it's a code.
Why $1.10? Because you could buy a $9
That's not
notebook.
bad.
Because if you buy a $9 notebook, then you feel like you have to be pristine, that you can't make a mess. Yeah. And $1.10 is like, who cares? You can just go get another one.
Yeah. So would you say you wrote this pretty fast? I know you said you did that.
Oh, I wrote it. I mean,
back to it.
I wrote most of the pieces in a month, but I take a long time to revise. I mean, I could take months on, like a piece that's going to end up being 400 words. Yeah. Because you get down, when you are writing very short, it's not only the words you write, it's the sound of words that have to be pleasing, and the motifs, like, as you say, that went in at the end when I was arranging the collection. But so you could say I wrote it very fast. I drafted it very fast, but writing takes time. Revision. Writing is revision. Hear that, students? Most students don't like revising. No, they think it's punishment. And it's like, look at it this way. I mean, if you took the SATs again, you'd have to pay for it. Again, you have to pay for it every time.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
So, and you don't have to pay for it. You could do it again, It's like, whoa, you get to do it again.
Would you be willing to read another one?
Sure.
I'm going with your, the point about motifs. And I want to, for people listening to this, I want to give a little note. One of the things that comes back is there's this imagery of dust and powder. Petey is cremated. There's images of ash, and this is one where I'll just forecast a little bit. There's the line, "the ghost of sugar," and powder, like a kiss in powder, plays a particular role in this.
It is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I'll be quiet.
It is just one of the last ones I wrote. I don't think it came about in the notebook. I think I wrote it last. I realized I needed it. So it is. The coffee at grief group is bitter, but Petty drinks it down like a punishment for a crime she's not done paying for. Elise says it's best not to think in those terms, right, wrong, guilty, innocent, that some things just are. The grasses the sky is, winter is, and people we love, even kids, get sick and die, the biggest is. Patty Lee remembers the word problems on the standardized tests. If there are X number of people and only the Y's have apples, how many pies can Z make? How the radiator clanked and hissed. How heat had a smell to it of iron cotton and swimming pools. Her teacher, Mr. Stevens, in the cranberry sweater raveling at the elbows, down to the undershirt he wore in the winter. He had a son who was slow to walk or talk or grow, who rode in a red wagon. Mr. Stevens pulled it around downtown on Saturdays, to the hardware store and then to the bakery where Patty Lee worked part-time. The kid had powdered sugar all over his face when he hugged her, what he did whenever he was introduced to someone. She was wearing a black apron and pants, and the ghost of the sugar lingered long after she brushed it off. Like motherhood, even after your kid dies, X equals Y. It is, you are.
That one got to me. I think that's a really tough metaphor. I don't want to explain it to you, but that metaphor is doing a lot of work there, and that there's that idea. Even if you were a mother, if you're a parent, even though the child is gone,
you still are.
Yeah, that's a really kind of difficult idea.
My parents are both gone. I'm still a daughter.
Right. Yeah.
I'll always be. You know, I still hear there's not a day that I don't think of them. You know, like usually my mother telling me I shouldn't be wearing that. You're not going out of the house like that. Less of that lately, and this is another. I think this is probably the primo example. This particular story about how third person can work, you know, where she's in the grief group, but then she dissociates and, you know, like is able to go back to, you know, the sounds of the, you know, and then it takes her back to school and the problems and takes her back to the teacher and who he was, and then it comes back around to, you know, the equation and back to the present, really, without saying so or announcing it, which is what short pieces can do. You don't expect, there's not a clear beginning, middle, and end, you know, the perfect Freytag's pyramid, that it's more, you know, like it works maybe more like a poem, where you're skating along on the images rather than on the chronology. So yeah, but yeah, that one I wrote, as I said, towards the end, when I started understanding, you know, like what this was, you know, like how it, after my dad died, I said, well, you know, I still am who I was, even though I don't have that relationship. And I realized she was too, so, yeah. Yeah. I hope too, you know, like I think it's a moment of, for her, it's a moment of aha. It's a real epiphany for her to realize this. And then, you know, like that it isn't something she has lost her son, but it's not something she's lost. That will always be with her. And that's, you know, like each story I want, you know, like people to see. I hope they, you know, like they can read it in any order, but if they read it from beginning to end, they'll understand, you know, like the incremental movement towards from not being okay to being okay.
That's an idea that I don't know if I would have really understood when I was a kid, but it hits me now. Okay.
That's why we don't see a lot of 10-year-old Nobel winners.
I can't think of a single one.
Not yet.
All right, young people, what's your advice for a young writer? For example, Carly Fowler. You gave us one. Advice for old writers too, like me. Revise. What else should we be doing?
Get out of your own way. You know, like this is, I embarked on an N again, you know, like it's a literary word that begins with an N and ends with an L, and to talk about it is like, yeah, I know. To talk about it is kind of like talking to a pitcher during, you know, like a no-hitter. You don't do that. That's one of the things in baseball you do not do. But I've written like 3 other ones before that have kind of stayed in my drawer in my computer over the last 25, 30 years. And this one I realize I'm getting out of my own way. For a draft, I'm not questioning anything. I'm just going, you know, like I'm not, a friend of mine said, well, do you like it? I said, that's not a question for now. A question is just getting down the words and moving towards, you know, like understanding what the story is.
I'll leave that alone.
Do. Get out of your own way.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Carly. I also want to thank the people behind the cameras who made this show happen. Mike Smith was our director today. Our technical director was Jonathan Frederick. Nasim Hughes ran the audio. Running the Chiron was Keith Doherty. Jennifer D'Angelo, Jacob Patrick, and Nick Rivoli operated the cameras today. Neil Parrish was our floor manager. And as always, thanks to Professor Carbonizing.
I love that quote that every artist should use. Oh, it's one of my favorites.